The wolf should have died before midnight. Its silver fur was stained with blood. One foreleg lay twisted beneath its massive body, and every shallow breath froze into tiny crystals before disappearing into the storm. Snow gathered across its back so quickly that it looked less like a living creature and more like another frozen boulder abandoned by winter. The girl had nothing left. No fire, no food, no family, only the worn blanket she had spent 3 winters stitching together from scraps. She stared at the freezing animal for one impossible moment. Then, with trembling hands that had already begun to lose feeling, she wrapped the blanket around the wolf instead of herself. Hours later, someone knocked on her broken cabin door. Not once, not twice. Dozens of armored wolves surrounded the clearing, and standing among them was a man wearing the royal crest of the Alpha King. He looked directly at her and quietly asked, "Where is my wolf?" Winter had swallowed the Frostfang kingdom weeks earlier. The mountains no longer wore snow. They had become snow. Entire forests disappeared beneath white silence, and every trail known to hunters vanished beneath fresh drifts before sunrise. Even wolves stayed close to their dens during storms like this one. Only someone with nowhere else to go would still be outside. Elara Ashwin pulled her faded cloak tighter around her shoulders as the wind clawed at her face. The woven basket hanging from her arm held only a handful of bitter roots and dried pine needles. Hardly enough for another day. Still she searched. She always searched. Not because she expected kindness from the mountain. Because hunger never waited. The small cabin waiting for her beyond the frozen pine forest barely deserved the name. Its roof leaked whenever snow melted, one shutter hung crooked on rusted hinges, and smoke only escaped the chimney if the wind was feeling merciful. Yet it was the only place she had left. Years ago, another pack had called her one of their own. Now even their memories had forgotten her. A sharp cry broke through the storm. Elara stopped walking. Not a bird, not a deer, a wolf. Pain carried differently through winter air. It echoed longer, thinner, almost like the mountain itself was mourning. She listened again. There, somewhere beyond a cluster of frost-covered pines. Every sensible instinct warned her to turn back. An injured wolf was still a wolf, but her feet ignored caution. She pushed through waist-deep snow until she reached a narrow ravine where broken branches lay scattered across the ice. At the bottom rested a massive silver wolf. Even lying motionless, it was larger than any wolf she had ever seen. Its coat shimmered beneath layers of snow like moonlight trapped beneath frozen water. Dark blood stained the white ground around one foreleg. An old hunting spear lay snapped in half nearby. Someone had wanted this wolf dead. The animal slowly lifted its head. Golden eyes met hers. There was no growl, no snapping jaws, only exhaustion. Elara crouched several steps away, careful not to threaten it. "So," she whispered through chattering teeth, "you survived this long." The wolf blinked once, almost as if answering. She searched the wound with cautious eyes. The spearhead had sliced deep through muscle before breaking away. The bleeding had slowed. The cold had nearly frozen it shut. "If I leave," she murmured softly, "you'll die before morning." The wolf closed its eyes, perhaps accepting that truth. Elara looked toward the darkening sky. Night was coming quickly. If she stayed, she might freeze beside it. If she left, it certainly would. For a long time, she simply knelt there while snow settled across her hair. Then she sighed. "You chose the wrong person to collapse beside." Carefully, she removed the rough blanket from her shoulders. It was patched more times than she could count. Every square carried a memory of another winter survived. Her mother's old sleeve, her father's worn hunting scarf, pieces stitched together after everything else had been taken away. It was all she owned. Her fingers hesitated only once. Then she wrapped it gently around the wolf. Warmth disappeared from her own body almost instantly. The wolf opened its eyes again. Confusion flickered there. Then something quieter. "Trust. I've gone cold before," Elara whispered with a tired smile. "You haven't." She gathered fallen branches and stacked them around the animal to block the wind before crushing medicinal evergreen needles into the wound. Their sharp scent filled the frozen air. Hours slipped by. Darkness swallowed the forest. The temperature fell until every breath burned. Elara leaned against a nearby pine, fighting sleep. Several times distant howls drifted across the mountains. Each time the silver wolf slowly raised its head. Not in fear, in warning. The unseen wolves never came closer. Near midnight, snow began covering Elara's shoulders. Her hands had become numb. She rubbed them together weakly before laughing to herself. So this is how stubbornness ends. The wolf struggled onto 3 legs. Its injured foreleg barely touched the ground. Slowly, painfully, it crossed the short distance between them. Before Elara understood what it intended, the enormous animal lowered itself beside her. Its thick body pressed gently against her frozen side. Heat, real heat. She stared in disbelief. The wolf had returned the warmth she had given away. Without speaking, she rested one trembling hand against its neck. Neither moved again. Above them the storm finally began to fade. Just before dawn, Aster lifted his head. His ears twitched toward the eastern ridge. Elara heard it moments later. Not wolves. Horses. Many of them. Metal clinked against metal. Orders echoed through the trees. Blue banners carrying the crest of the Frostfang crown emerged between the pines as armored soldiers surrounded the clearing with disciplined precision. Towering royal wolves stepped silently beside them. At their center rode a man, wearing a black winter cloak fastened with a silver wolf emblem. He dismounted before anyone else moved. His sharp gray eyes swept across the clearing. They paused first on the wolf, then on the blanket, finally, on the young woman kneeling beside him. Without raising his voice, he asked only one question. "Where's my wolf?" Before anyone could answer, the great silver wolf rose to its feet. Royal soldiers instinctively stepped forward. The Alpha King lifted one hand, silently stopping them. The ancient guardian ignored every warrior in the clearing, ignored the king, ignored the royal healers. Instead, the wolf crossed the snow. It stopped beside Elara and calmly sat at her feet. The entire forest fell into stunned silence. No one spoke, because everyone standing there understood one impossible truth. The sacred guardian wolf had made a choice, and it had chosen the forgotten Omega. For several long moments, no one in the clearing dared to move. Snow drifted lazily between the towering pines, settling upon polished armor and dark wolf fur alike. Every soldier's attention remained fixed on the impossible sight before them. The sacred guardian wolf sat quietly beside a young Omega dressed in patched clothes, wrapped in little more than a thin cloak. Royal guardian, Aster had ignored the Alpha King. No living wolf had ever done such a thing. Kalen Draven watched the scene without speaking. He had spent nearly 3 days searching every mountain pass after Aster disappeared during the storm. Entire patrols had risked freezing to death, looking for the ancient wolf. Rumors had already begun spreading through the kingdom that losing the guardian meant the moon goddess had abandoned the royal bloodline. Yet here Aster was, alive, protected, not by warriors, not by nobles, but by a woman who looked as though winter itself had nearly claimed her. Kalen slowly approached. His boots sank softly into untouched snow until he stood only a few steps away from Elara. She instinctively lowered her eyes, not because she feared him, because years of rejection had taught her that powerful people rarely looked kindly upon forgotten Omegas. "You treated his wound," Kalen observed quietly. It was not a question. Elara nodded once. "The spear missed the bone." Kalen glanced toward the crude bandage woven from strips torn from her own sleeve. "You know healing." "A little." "You stayed through the night." There wasn't anyone else. Simple words. No pride. No expectation of gratitude. Kalen noticed the frostbite beginning to spread across her fingertips. Then he looked toward the blanket covering Aster. Old. Faded. Painstakingly repaired dozens of times. He understood immediately. She had given away the only thing standing between herself and death. Royal physician Elder Rowan knelt beside the wolf. "My king." The old healer's voice trembled. "The herbs." Kalen looked down. Wild frost pine, winter moss, snow root, not rare medicines, but applied with remarkable precision. They slowed the bleeding. Rowan looked toward Elara with open surprise. "Who taught you this?" "My mother." "And where is she now?" Silence settled between them. Elara simply lowered her gaze. "I don't know." Rowan said nothing more. Some grief needed no explanation. Behind the royal line, whispers began spreading among the nobles who had ridden with the king. "She's an Omega. Look at her clothes. Why would Aster remain beside her? This cannot be allowed." One voice, smooth as polished ice, drifted above the others. Perhaps the wolf is simply confused. Lady Seraphine stepped gracefully through the snow. Her silver cloak shimmered with embroidered moonflowers, untouched by the storm. Behind her walked attendants, who carried heated furs and lanterns, despite the daylight beginning to brighten the horizon. She studied Elara with polite curiosity. A smile rested upon her lips. It never reached her eyes. "What is your name?" "Elara." "Family?" "I have none." "Pack?" "I belong to no pack." A flicker of satisfaction crossed Seraphine's face before disappearing. "How unfortunate!" Aster suddenly rose. A deep growl rolled through the silent clearing. Not loud, not violent, merely enough. Every royal wolf immediately stiffened. Seraphine took one careful step backward. The guardian's golden eyes never left her. Kalen noticed. He noticed everything. The growl had come before Seraphine moved. As though Aster had sensed something no human could. The Alpha King finally spoke. "Prepare the sled." One commander hesitated. "My king, the guardian usually rides with you." Kalen looked toward Aster. The ancient wolf had already returned to Elara's side. He has already made his decision. No one argued again. The journey to Frostfang Palace lasted nearly a full day. Heavy clouds parted at last, revealing endless mountains wrapped in silver light. Frozen waterfalls glittered between cliffs while smoke curled lazily from distant villages hidden beneath blankets of snow. Elara had never traveled beyond the forest since her exile years ago. Everything felt impossibly large. The royal sled glided smoothly across packed snow. Aster lay beside her instead of inside the king's escort. Whenever she shifted uneasily, the old wolf quietly rested his head against her shoulder until she relaxed again. Across from them sat Kalen. He spent much of the journey reading reports handed to him by mounted scouts. Occasionally he glanced toward Aster. More often, he found himself studying Elara, not because she was beautiful, though beneath the exhaustion he suspected she might be. He watched because nothing about the situation made sense. Guardian wolves chose kings, warriors, great healers, never forgotten exiles. There had to be a reason. He simply had not discovered it yet. As evening approached, the palace finally appeared beyond the mountains. Its towering walls rose directly from black stone cliffs, crowned by silver banners dancing in the icy wind. Hundreds of warm lights glowed behind enormous windows, while wolves patrolled snow-covered courtyards below. Elara stopped breathing for a moment. She had heard stories about Frostfang Palace as a child. None captured its quiet majesty. Massive gates slowly opened. Trumpets echoed through the valley. Servants, guards, healers, and nobles gathered beneath towering archways as the royal procession entered. Then something unexpected happened. The moment Aster stepped onto the palace courtyard, he ignored the entrance leading toward the royal wolf sanctuary. Instead, he turned, walked directly beside Elara, and refused to take another step unless she continued walking with him. The entire courtyard watched in stunned silence. Even Elder Rowan whispered under his breath. "I have never seen him do that." Kalen said nothing. But for the first time since finding Aster, a single question settled heavily in his mind. Perhaps the kingdom had not merely found its guardian wolf. Perhaps the guardian wolf had found someone the kingdom had forgotten. That evening, after Aster rejected 3 royal healers unless Elara remained nearby, ancient records were quietly brought out from the palace archives. One forgotten sentence caught Elder Rowan's attention. His weathered face slowly lost its color. He looked toward the Alpha King. "My king," Rowan whispered, "there is something you need to see." Deep beneath Frostfang Palace, hidden inside the oldest royal archive, Elder Rowan opened a crumbling scroll untouched for nearly 600 years. Across the faded parchment, one sentence remained perfectly preserved. "When a guardian wolf accepts warmth from one who possesses nothing, the kingdom must question not the wolf's choice, but its own history." The palace had never felt so quiet. Even before sunrise, Frostfang Fortress was usually alive with the sounds of soldiers changing watch, servants carrying fresh bread through stone corridors, and wolves greeting the morning with deep, echoing howls from the royal sanctuary. Today, something was different. Every conversation ended the moment Elara passed. Every pair of eyes followed her, not with hatred, not entirely, with uncertainty. 4 generations. Every child in Frostfang had learned the same lesson before they could even read. Guardian wolves belong to the crown. Guardian wolves obeyed the Alpha King. Guardian wolves never chose strangers. Yet Aster had broken all 3 traditions without hesitation. Elara stood quietly beside the sanctuary gates while Elder Rowan finished changing Aster's bandages. Morning sunlight streamed through the high stone arches, illuminating countless wolves resting peacefully inside the enormous sanctuary. Some slept near steaming hot springs built into the mountain itself. Others wandered freely among ancient pine trees growing beneath an open ceiling where snowflakes drifted gently through enchanted crystal shields. The wolves noticed Elara immediately. Several lifted their heads. Instead of growling, they watched. One young white wolf cautiously approached. Then another. Within minutes, nearly a dozen wolves surrounded her, sniffing her hands before calmly settling at her feet. The sanctuary attendants exchanged stunned glances. "I've worked here 20 years, one whispered. "They don't even greet visiting alphas this way." Elara smiled nervously. "I didn't do anything." "No," Rowan replied softly. "That's exactly what concerns everyone." Later that morning, Kaelin summoned his closest advisors to the Hall of Winter. The chamber overlooked the frozen valley through towering glass windows carved with silver wolves beneath the moon. Around the circular table sat generals, historians, healers, and representatives from the kingdom's oldest noble houses. Lady Seraphine arrived last. She offered Kaelin a graceful bow. "The guardian appears healthier." "He is." "Then perhaps the girl has served her purpose." Silence settled over the chamber. Kaelin folded his hands. "You believe so?" "She is an exile," Seraphine answered calmly. "Keeping her within the palace invites unnecessary rumors." General Darius frowned. "The people are already whispering." "Exactly," Seraphine replied. "They need certainty, not stories about sacred wolves abandoning centuries of royal tradition." Across the table, Elder Rowan slowly unrolled an ancient parchment. "I found something in the lower archives." The room fell silent. Dust still clung to the faded scroll. Its edges had darkened with age. The royal seal impressed into the wax belonged to a king who had ruled nearly 6 centuries earlier. Rowan carefully cleared his throat. This record was hidden behind damaged census ledgers. Kaelin studied him. "Read it." The old healer nodded. His voice echoed quietly across the chamber. "The guardian does not bow to blood." Several nobles frowned. Rowan continued. "He follows only the soul willing to surrender warmth while expecting nothing in return." A murmur swept through the room. Seraphine's expression remained perfectly composed. Only her fingers tightened slightly around the arm of her chair. Rowan read the final passage. "When such a soul is found, the guardian becomes witness that mercy, not birth, preserves the moon goddess's covenant." The chamber erupted. "Impossible. That contradicts royal law. It has to be forged. Our ancestors would never." Kaelin raised one hand. Instant silence returned. He looked toward Rowan. "Why has no one seen this before?" The old healer hesitated. "Because," his weathered eyes lowered, "someone removed every other record connected to it." By afternoon, the discovery had spread through the palace despite every attempt to contain it. Servants whispered while preparing meals. Guards argued during patrol changes. Kitchen workers repeated fragments of the ancient oath until no one remembered which version had been true. Some believed Elara had bewitched Aster. Others insisted the moon goddess herself had intervened. Only Elara remained unaware of the growing storm surrounding her. She spent the afternoon gathering fresh herbs from the palace gardens beneath Rowan's guidance. "You always choose winter sage first," Rowan observed. "It eases swelling. And frost time. It prevents infection." The old healer smiled. "Your mother taught you well." Elara carefully tied another bundle. "She said herbs never cared about titles." Rowan became unusually quiet. After a long pause he asked, "What was her name?" Elara looked toward the distant mountains. "Lysandra." The old man's hands froze. One dried leaf slipped from his fingers. "You knew her." She turned. Rowan quickly looked away. "I may have crossed paths with her once." Something inside his voice sounded wrong. Not surprise. Recognition. Guilt. Before Elara could ask another question, an enormous shadow crossed the snowy garden. Aster had arrived. The ancient wolf walked directly toward her, carrying something gently between his jaws. A broken piece of carved stone. He carefully laid it at her feet. Its surface was covered with strange silver markings worn smooth by time. Rowan knelt immediately. His breathing caught. Where did he find this? Aster simply looked toward the northern wall of the palace, hidden beneath centuries of ivy and snow. That evening Kaelin joined Elara in the gardens. Neither spoke for several moments. The silence between them no longer felt uncomfortable, only thoughtful. He picked up the carved stone. What do you see? She traced the faded markings with one finger. It isn't decoration. No. It looks like... She paused. Part of something larger. Kaelin nodded. So I thought. Aster quietly rose. Without looking back, the ancient wolf began walking toward the oldest wing of the palace. Not toward the sanctuary. Not toward the royal chambers. Toward a forgotten corridor sealed generations ago. He stopped beside an enormous stone door, then looked directly at Elara. Only Elara, as if waiting. Kaelin exchanged a glance with Rowan. The corridor was closed almost 300 years ago, Rowan murmured. No one knows what's beyond it. Aster placed one massive paw against the ancient door. A low rumble echoed through the stone. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Then, the centuries-old lock released itself with a deafening crack. The massive doors slowly swung inward. Cold air rushed from the darkness beyond. Torchlight revealed walls covered from floor to ceiling in ancient murals. Painted wolves, forgotten kings, and at the very center, a young woman placing a patched blanket over an injured wolf. Elara stopped breathing. The woman in the mural looked almost exactly like her mother. Before anyone could speak, a faint metallic sound echoed from somewhere deep inside the forgotten passage. Someone else was already in the corridor, hidden within the ancient passage. A single torch suddenly went out. Darkness swallowed half the corridor. Then footsteps echoed from somewhere beyond the murals. Someone had entered the forgotten halls before them, and they clearly had no intention of letting the truth leave alive. The forgotten corridor fell silent. The sound of retreating footsteps vanished somewhere beyond the darkness, leaving only the faint crackle of Kaelin's torch. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The murals stretching along the walls seemed almost alive beneath the flickering light. Wolves walked beside ordinary villagers instead of kings. Omegas stood shoulder to shoulder with alphas during ceremonies. Children offered blankets to wounded animals, while guardian wolves bowed their heads in return. It was a history no one inside Frostfang Palace had ever been taught. Kaelin slowly stepped toward the largest mural. Centuries of dust covered its surface, but one image remained untouched by time. An alpha king kneeling, not before another ruler, before an elderly woman dressed in the plain robes of a healer. Above them stood a massive silver wolf whose eyes were carved from polished moonstone. Beneath the mural, ancient words had been engraved into the stone. Mercy grants the crown its right to rule. Kaelin stared at the inscription. My father taught me that strength secured the throne. Elder Rowan's voice was barely above a whisper. Your ancestors believed something very different. Elara remained silent. Her eyes never left the mural of the young woman covering an injured wolf with a patched blanket. Every detail unsettled her. The careful stitching, the faded pattern, even the way the woman smiled despite the bitter snow. It reminded her so painfully of stories her mother used to tell beside their tiny fireplace. Stories that had seemed like fairy tales. Until now, a sudden growl echoed through the corridor. Aster, his ears flattened against his head. The ancient wolf's golden eyes fixed themselves on the darkness beyond the murals. He was not frightened. He was warning them. Kaelin immediately drew his sword. Who's there? Only silence answered. Then, a shadow darted across the far end of the passage. A hooded figure. Fast. Too fast to identify. Stay with Rowan. Kaelin's command came calmly before he sprinted forward. 2 royal guards followed close behind. Steel rang against stone as the chase disappeared deeper into the forgotten tunnels. Elara listened until even the echoes faded. Only then did she realize Aster hadn't followed the king. Instead, the great wolf remained beside her, watching, waiting, almost as if he believed she was in greater danger. Nearly 20 minutes later Kaelin returned. Snow clung to his boots. His breathing remained steady despite the pursuit. He escaped. One guard carried something wrapped in cloth. "We found this." Inside lay a small silver ring engraved with a crescent moon, surrounded by thorn vines. Rowan's face immediately lost its color. "No!" Kaelin looked at him. "You recognize it?" Rowan hesitated. Finally he nodded. "It belonged to House Varek." "The oldest noble family," one guard muttered. "They were believed extinct." "They were believed loyal," Rowan corrected quietly. The difference lingered heavily in the cold air. That evening the palace settled into uneasy silence. Word spread quickly that someone had been hiding inside the sealed corridor before it was opened. Questions multiplied faster than answers. Why was someone already inside? Who had known the passage existed? And why had they fled instead of confronting the king? Behind polished smiles and formal greetings, suspicion quietly settled over the royal court. Meanwhile, Elara returned to Aster's chamber carrying fresh herbs. The sanctuary had become strangely comforting. Steam drifted from the natural hot springs, while wolves rested peacefully beneath towering pine trees growing inside the mountain sanctuary. Aster lifted his head the moment she entered. He walked toward her without limping. His wound had almost completely closed. "You heal quickly." She smiled as she gently brushed fresh snow from his silver fur. The wolf lowered his enormous head until it rested against her shoulder. "You don't have to thank me." His tail gave one slow sweep across the stone floor. From nearby, younger wolves watched quietly. One by one, they approached, not demanding attention, simply choosing to rest near her. Sanctuary keepers exchanged nervous glances. No one could remember another outsider ever being accepted this completely. Later that night, Kaelin stood alone on the palace balcony, overlooking the moonlit valley. Footsteps approached behind him. "Lady Seraphine." "The court is unsettled," she said smoothly. "It should be. You give too much importance to a coincidence." Kaelin kept his eyes on the snow-covered mountains. "You believe Aster makes coincidences?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she folded her hands gracefully. "Guardian wolves are old. They can become confused. They can be manipulated." Finally, Kaelin looked at her. His gray eyes were calm, dangerously calm. "You've known Aster since you were a child." "I have." "Has he ever mistaken loyalty?" For the first time that evening, Seraphine had no answer. Far below the balcony, hidden among frost-covered gardens, a servant quietly slipped through the shadows carrying a small leather pouch. He crossed the courtyard unnoticed, entered the eastern wing, and disappeared into the private chambers belonging to House Varek's remaining supporters. Inside waited 3 cloaked figures. One of them slowly emptied the pouch onto the table. Dark purple berries, dried black roots, powdered nightshade, not enough to kill a human, enough to kill an ancient wolf. "The first attempt failed," one figure whispered. "Then we try again." "And the girl?" A long silence followed. Finally another voice answered. "If she remains beside the guardian, she dies with him." The next morning began peacefully. Fresh snow glittered beneath pale sunlight. Elara prepared Aster's medicine while humming a song her mother used to sing. The old wolf watched her with gentle eyes. Without warning, he suddenly stood. His ears snapped forward. A low growl rolled through the sanctuary. Every wolf inside immediately rose to its feet. The peaceful atmosphere vanished. Aster lunged toward the feeding trough, just as one of the younger wolves lowered its muzzle to drink. Elara reacted without thinking. She grabbed the wooden bowl before the young wolf could taste it. The scent hit her instantly. Bitter. Sharp. Wrong. She dipped one finger into the broth, then smelled it again. Winter monkshood, hidden beneath fragrant herbs. Nearly impossible to detect. Deadly. Her heartbeat quickened. "This isn't medicine." Rowan rushed forward. His face turned pale after one glance. "It's poison." The sanctuary erupted into chaos. Guards sealed every entrance. Royal wolves snarled at strangers. Servants were questioned where they stood. Kaelin arrived moments later, his expression unreadable. He looked first at the poison bowl, then at Elara. "You noticed it?" She nodded. "My mother always said monks had smell sweet, until death gets close." Kaelin held her gaze for several long seconds. Then, before the gathered guards and nobles, he spoke words no one expected. "From this moment forward, Elara Ashwin acts under my direct protection." Gasps spread through the sanctuary. Even Seraphine's composed smile faltered. The king had made his choice, and with that single declaration, the battle for Frostfang Kingdom had quietly begun. As the poisoned herbs were carried away for examination, an elderly stable keeper pushed through the crowd, staring at Elara with trembling eyes. His weathered face drained of color. Slowly, he reached toward the faded embroidery stitched into the edge of her old cloak. Tears filled his eyes. "I know that crest," he whispered. "I buried your parents, and they died protecting the greatest secret this kingdom has ever hidden." The sanctuary fell silent. Even the wolves stopped moving. The old stable-keeper's trembling hand rested against the faded embroidery stitched into the corner of Elara's cloak. His eyes glistened with tears that had waited decades to fall. "I know the stitching," he whispered. "I watched your mother sew it." Elara's heartbeat slowed until every sound around her seemed impossibly distant. "You knew my mother?" The old man nodded. Her name was Lysandra Ashwin. Hearing the name spoken aloud inside the royal palace felt unreal. For years, Elara had whispered it only to herself, afraid that forgetting it would mean losing the last piece of her family. Kaelin stepped closer. "You said you buried her." The old man's shoulders sagged beneath invisible weight. "I buried both of them." Hours later, the Alpha King ordered the Hall of Winter cleared. Only a handful of people remained. Kaelin, Elara, Elder Rowan, the stable keeper, whose name was Garrick. Outside, snow drifted gently against stained-glass windows, while fires crackled inside great stone hearths. No one hurried Garrick. Some memories demanded patience. He stared into the flames before speaking. 20 years ago, your parents served the palace." Elara frowned. "My mother was a healer." "She was, and your father was one of the king's royal wardens." Elara looked up in surprise. "My father served the crown. He protected something far more important than the throne." Kaelin leaned forward. "What?" Garrick looked toward Aster. The ancient wolf rested beside Elara without making a sound. "He protected the truth." The old man's voice carried them back through forgotten winters, long before Kaelin became king. Before even his father ruled, guardian wolves had chosen rulers according to an ancient oath. Not because of noble blood, not because of strength, because they recognized compassion. The chosen ruler protected the weak before themselves. Only then would the guardian wolves stand beside them. "It kept balance between wolves and people," Garrick said. "No family could claim the throne simply because they were born to it." Kaelin slowly lowered his eyes. "My father never told me this. He never knew." Rowan quietly answered. "Someone made certain he never would." Garrick reached inside his weathered coat. From an inner pocket, he removed a small leather bundle tied with faded blue cord. "My wife begged me to burn this." His voice trembled. "I couldn't." He placed the bundle into Elara's hands. "Your mother asked me to protect it if she never returned." Elara carefully untied the cord. Inside lay 3 objects: a tiny silver moon pendant, a dried white flower, and a folded letter. The parchment had yellowed with age. The handwriting remained beautiful. Elara recognized it instantly. Her mother's. With shaking hands she unfolded it. The first line blurred beneath gathering tears. "My dearest Elara." Her breathing caught. The room disappeared. Only her mother's words remained. "If you are reading this, then we failed to protect the truth ourselves. Never hate the wolves. Never hate the king. The ones responsible wear friendly faces. Remember what I taught you. Mercy is never weakness. One day, a guardian wolf will find you. When that day comes, trust him." A tear slipped silently down Elara's cheek. Then another. She had spent years believing her parents abandoned her. Instead, they had died trying to protect her future. No one interrupted her grief. Not even Kaelin. He understood loss too well. Only after several quiet minutes did he finally speak. "I owe you an apology." Elara slowly looked up. "For what?" "My family ruled while yours suffered. You were a child. I still inherited what my family failed to question." His voice remained steady. "But I won't pass that burden to the next generation." There was no royal pride in those words. Only honesty. For the first time, Elara truly looked at him. Not as the Alpha King. As another person carrying wounds he had never chosen. Something changed between them. Not romance. Not yet. Understanding. The following morning, Rowan requested permission to search the palace archives again. This time, They searched beneath the oldest records, behind loose stones, hidden inside the archive walls. Hours passed. Dust covered their clothes. Hope began fading. Then Elara noticed something unusual. One stone near the fireplace had no soot. Someone had moved it recently. She knelt, pressed gently. The stone shifted inward with a dull click. A hidden compartment opened. Inside rested dozens of scrolls wrapped in waterproof leather. Rowan gasped. Impossible. Kalen carefully opened the first scroll. His expression darkened. Royal decrees, forged signatures, execution orders, bribery records. Every document carried one family seal. House Varek. 4 generations they had quietly erased every law connected to the Guardian Oath. Every healer who objected disappeared. Every witness vanished. Every surviving record had been destroyed. Except these. Because someone, perhaps Elara's parents, had hidden the evidence before dying. By evening the palace buzzed with whispers. Royal scribes worked feverishly to authenticate the documents. Generals quietly shifted troop assignments. Messengers rode toward distant allied pacts. No announcement had been made. Yet everyone sensed the kingdom stood upon the edge of enormous change. Only Lady Seraphine remained strangely calm. She stood alone inside her private chambers overlooking the snowy cliffs. One servant entered. Bearing news, my lady. She accepted the sealed report. Read it once, then calmly placed it into the fire. So, she whispered to herself. They found the archives. Her reflection flickered in the window. Not frightened. Resolved. She opened an old iron chest hidden beneath her bed. Inside rested polished ceremonial armor bearing the forgotten crest of House Varek. Beside it lay an ancient crown. Not the king's crown. Another one. One believed destroyed centuries earlier. Seraphine gently lifted it into her hands. If mercy returns, she murmured softly, our family loses everything. She looked toward the palace towers where snow continued falling beneath a pale moon. Then the kingdom will burn before I surrender it. That same night, Aster became restless. The old wolf paced the sanctuary endlessly. His ears remained fixed toward the southern mountains. One by one, every royal wolf stood. Dozens of deep howls echoed through Frostfang. Not cries of mourning. Warnings. Kalen stepped onto the palace walls. Far beyond the valley, hundreds of distant torchlights moved through the snow. An army. Not foreign invaders. Noble banners. House Varek had finally revealed itself. The conspiracy had ended. The rebellion had begun. As war horns echoed across the frozen mountains, Aster suddenly turned away from the approaching army. Instead, he walked directly to Elara. Then, before every soldier watching from the palace walls, the oldest guardian wolf in the kingdom slowly lowered his head before her. One after another, every royal wolf followed. The first rays of dawn touched the snow-covered peaks, but no warmth followed. Winter itself seemed to pause. Every soldier standing atop Frostfang's walls watched in silence as Aster lowered his massive head before Elara. The ancient guardian had bowed. One by one, the royal wolves copied him. Dozens of powerful beasts, feared throughout the kingdom, lowered themselves before the forgotten Omega. No command had been spoken. No ritual had begun. They had chosen. A whisper spread across the battlements like the wind itself. The guardian has spoken. The old oath. It's true. Even hardened warriors who had spent decades defending the crown stared in disbelief. Kalen remained perfectly still. His eyes never left Elara. She looked overwhelmed, almost frightened by what was happening. She did not step forward to claim authority. She did not lift her chin proudly. Instead, she knelt beside Aster and gently rested one hand against his silver neck. You don't have to do this, she whispered. Aster closed his eyes. His answer was silence. But silence, somehow, said everything. The warning horns echoed again. This time they came from the southern watchtowers. The enemy had reached Frostfang's outer valley. Hundreds of armored riders emerged through blowing snow beneath black banners marked with the forgotten crest of House Varek. Behind them marched soldiers from lesser noble houses that had secretly pledged loyalty years earlier. Their numbers were overwhelming. The palace gates closed with a thunderous crash. Archers climbed the walls. War wolves lined the battlements. Inside the great courtyard, citizens gathered in frightened silence. They had expected war against outsiders. not against their own nobles. Kaelin fastened the silver clasp of his winter cloak. General Darius approached. My king, the eastern wall can hold. The western pass is vulnerable. Kaelin nodded. We defend the people first. What about the nobles demanding sanctuary? Kaelin looked toward the crowded courtyard below. They stand beside everyone else. No family receives special protection today. The general smiled. As it should be. Inside the throne hall, Lady Seraphine removed her traveling cloak. Gone was the graceful noblewoman admired by the court. In her place stood the last living heir of House Varek. Ancient ceremonial armor shimmered beneath torchlight. Upon her head rested the forgotten crown hidden for generations. She slowly climbed the steps leading toward Frostfang's throne. Her followers surrounded the chamber. This kingdom, she declared, her voice carrying across the hall, has forgotten what strength looks like. She turned toward the nobles who had secretly supported her. For centuries, weak rulers allowed healers and commoners to influence royal law. Our ancestors corrected that mistake. And today, we finish what they began. The enormous doors opened. Kaelin entered alone. Snow dusted his shoulders. His sword remained sheathed. Behind him walked Elara, Aster, Rowan, General Darius, and dozens of royal wolves. Seraphine smiled coldly. You finally understand. Kaelin calmly shook his head. No, I finally know the truth. Without another word, Rowan stepped forward, carrying a heavy wooden chest. He placed it in the center of the throne hall. Royal scribes followed. So did witnesses from every great pack. Kaelin looked around the chamber. Today, every lie ends. One by one, the hidden scrolls were unrolled across a long stone table. Execution orders, forged decrees, false royal seals, letters proving House Varek had murdered healers, historians, and guardians who defended the ancient oath. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Several nobles staggered backward. Others lowered their heads in shame. Seraphine's smile finally disappeared. You forged those. Kaelin's voice remained calm. Did we forge your family seal as well? Another document was revealed. Then another. Every denial collapsed beneath undeniable proof. The conspiracy that had hidden itself for centuries stood exposed before the entire kingdom. Seraphine slowly drew her sword. So be it. If fear no longer rules, then only blood will. Her followers charged. Steel rang through the throne hall. Royal guards met the attackers with disciplined precision. The battle was fierce but controlled. Kaelin fought like the ruler his people already respected. Not with reckless fury, with quiet certainty. Every movement protected someone behind him. Elara remained near Rowan, guiding frightened servants toward safety. A wounded guard stumbled across the marble floor, clutching a deep wound. Without hesitation, Elara rushed to him. Ignoring the battle around her, she tore strips from her own sleeve and pressed herbs against the bleeding injury. Another soldier fell. She reached him too. Then another. She healed whoever needed her. Royal guard, kitchen servant, even one of Seraphine's young soldiers who had been abandoned by his commanders. Rowan watched in silent admiration. In the middle of war, she still chooses mercy. High above the battle, Seraphine saw it. The wounded enemy soldier looking at Elara with tears in his eyes. Not hatred, gratitude. For one brief moment, even some of her own followers hesitated. They had been told mercy was weakness, yet the woman they called dangerous was saving lives without asking whose side they served. The oldest lesson in Frostfang's forgotten history was unfolding before everyone. Compassion inspired loyalty that fear never could. Enraged, Seraphine raised her sword toward Elara. If she dies, the oath dies with her. She lunged. Before anyone could react, a silver blur crossed the hall. Aster, the ancient guardian, intercepted the strike. The blade scraped harmlessly across his thick shoulder. A thunderous growl shook the throne room. Every royal wolf immediately surged forward, not attacking wildly, surrounding Seraphine, blocking every escape. The wolves did not obey Kaelin. They obeyed the ancient oath. They had judged, and their judgment was final. Seraphine slowly lowered her sword. For the first time in her life, she understood she had already lost. The throne hall grew quiet. Kaelin approached her. You will receive a fair trial. You still offer justice. She laughed bitterly. After everything, Kaelin looked toward Elara, who was gently bandaging Aster's shoulder. No, he answered softly. After everything, we finally remember who we are. As sunset painted the snowy mountains gold, every surviving pack gathered inside Frostfang's central courtyard. Before thousands of witnesses, Elder Rowan read aloud the complete guardian oath for the first time in 600 years. The crown belongs not to the strongest hand, but to the heart willing to surrender its own warmth so another may live. A profound silence settled over the kingdom. Then every citizen, every warrior, every healer, knelt, not before power, before truth. Kaelin walked toward Elara. There was no crown in his hands, no ceremony prepared, only honesty. You gave away your only blanket, he said quietly, never expecting anyone to know. He smiled gently, but an old wolf remembered, and because he remembered, an entire kingdom found itself again. Elara looked across the courtyard. The frightened orphan she once had been seemed impossibly far away. She had never wanted a throne, never sought recognition. She had only refused to let another living soul freeze alone. And somehow, that simple act had changed history forever. Later that night, after peace finally settled over Frostfang, Kaelin found Elara standing alone in the Moon Temple. Between them rested the old patched blanket, carefully folded upon an ancient stone altar. Kaelin looked at it for a long moment before quietly asking, "If the kingdom asked you to stay, would you stay because of a crown, or because this place has finally begun to feel like home?" Weeks later, under a sky painted with the soft colors of early spring, the people of Frostfang gathered at the Moon Temple. No royal decree had summoned them. They came willingly. At the center of the temple stood a simple glass case. Inside rested an old patched blanket. Its stitching was uneven. Its colors had long faded. It possessed no jewels, no gold, no royal seal. Yet every person who entered lowered their head before it. Children asked why such an ordinary blanket had become the kingdom's greatest treasure. Their parents always answered the same way. Because that blanket reminds us that the greatest act of courage is not winning a battle. It is giving warmth to another soul when you have almost none left yourself. Outside, wolves rested peacefully beside children who laughed without fear. The ancient hatred between strength and kindness had finally ended. High upon the temple steps, Kaelin and Elara stood together, not as ruler and subject, nor as Alpha and Omega, but as partners who had chosen one another through trust, respect, and shared purpose. Below them, Aster lifted his silver head toward the rising sun. His once clouded eyes reflected the golden light with quiet satisfaction. Then, from the edge of the crowd, a small orphan girl noticed a shivering wolf pup hiding beneath a stone bench. Without hesitation, she removed the only wool blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She knelt, carefully covered the trembling pup, and smiled. Aster watched the scene unfold. His tail gave one slow sweep across the ground. The ancient guardian did not rise. He did not need to. The old oath no longer lived inside forgotten scrolls. It lived inside ordinary hearts. As dawn spread across the mountains of Frostfang, the patched blanket inside the Moon Temple caught the first ray of sunlight. The kingdom would remember kings. It would remember victories. But above all else, it would remember the lonely young woman who had once chosen to shiver through the cold so that a wounded wolf could survive the night. And because of that single choice, an entire kingdom found its way home. The war ended quietly, not because every wound had healed, but because for the first time in generations, no one wished to continue fighting. Snow still blanketed the mountains surrounding Frostfang Palace, but something invisible had changed. The silence no longer carried fear. It carried peace. Over the following weeks, black banners bearing the crest of House Verek disappeared from every fortress in the kingdom. Their hidden strongholds surrendered without bloodshed after the surviving nobles witnessed the evidence of centuries of deception. Those who had ordered murders stood before open courts. Those who had merely obeyed through fear were judged with fairness rather than revenge. It was slower than war, but far stronger. Kaelin insisted upon attending every hearing himself. The kingdom was wounded by hidden justice, he told his council. It will only heal beneath honest justice. No one argued. Not anymore. Winter gradually loosened its grip. For the first time in many years, merchants crossed the mountain roads without armed escorts. Children once again laughed in village squares where frightened whispers had long replaced joy. The royal sanctuary also changed. The wolves wandered more freely than ever before. No longer were they treated as symbols of royal authority. They became what they had always been meant to be, guardians of the people. Elara visited them every morning before sunrise. She checked old injuries, prepared medicines, fed abandoned wolf pups rescued from the mountains. She asked for nothing in return, exactly as she always had. Only now, she was no longer alone. Young healers from villages across Frostfang began arriving to learn from her. Many were omegas who had once believed their lives would never matter. Elara never called herself their teacher. She simply worked beside them. Kindness, she believed, was easier to imitate than instructions. One crisp morning, Rowan found her carefully wrapping herbs around a young wolf's injured paw. The old healer smiled. "You've become everything your mother hoped." Elara looked up. "I still have so much to learn." Rowan chuckled softly. The wisest healers always believe that. For a moment neither spoke. Then Rowan carefully placed a small wooden box into her hands. "I've been keeping this." She slowly opened it. Inside rested her mother's silver pendant, freshly polished, alongside her father's worn leather bracelet. "There was a time," Rowan whispered, "when I feared returning these would only reopen old wounds." He smiled through misty eyes. "I was wrong." Elara gently held the keepsakes against her heart. For years she had believed her family existed only in fading memories. Now, they felt close again, not through grief, through love. Meanwhile, Kalen spent long days rebuilding trust throughout the kingdom. He visited remote villages without royal ceremony. He listened more than he spoke. Farmers spoke of harsh winters. Hunters requested safer mountain crossings. Omegas asked only to be treated with dignity. Every request was written down. Every concern answered. General Darius laughed one evening. "You've become a ruler who carries more notebooks than swords." Kalen smiled faintly. "Swords end wars. Listening prevents them." One afternoon, Kalen rode alone toward Elara's old cabin. The roof had been repaired, the broken shutters replaced. Fresh smoke drifted from the chimney. Inside, everything remained almost exactly as she had left it. The tiny wooden table, the cracked teacup, the rough chair beside the fireplace. Only one thing was missing: the patched blanket. He smiled quietly. History now guarded it. Yet somehow the little cabin still felt warmer than many royal halls. Footsteps approached behind him. He turned. Elara stood in the doorway, carrying a basket of herbs gathered from the forest. "You found it. I wanted to see where everything began." She laughed softly. It wasn't very impressive. Kalen looked around the tiny room. "I disagree." She raised an eyebrow. "Why?" He slowly touched the old fireplace. "Because a kingdom nearly lost itself inside a palace, and found itself again in a cabin no larger than this." Elara lowered her eyes, unable to hide her smile. For a long moment they simply stood together, listening to the wind outside. Comfortable, unhurried, no crowns, no politics. Only two people whose lives had quietly become intertwined. Finally Kalen spoke. "I asked you something in the temple. I remember. I never heard your answer." Elara looked toward the mountains beyond the window. "When I first came here, I believed surviving another winter was enough." She turned back toward him. "But somewhere along the way, this kingdom stopped feeling like a place where I was tolerated. It became home." Kalen's expression softened. "And if I asked you to stay?" She smiled. "I already have. Not because you are the Alpha King. Not because fate demanded it. Because together, we've built something worth protecting." Those words meant more to Kalen than any royal oath. He stepped closer, not close enough to claim her, only close enough to ask. He gently offered his hand. "Then walk beside me. Not behind me. Never beneath me. Beside me." Elara looked at his outstretched hand. There was no pressure, no expectation, only choice. With quiet certainty, she placed her hand in his. Aster, who had been sleeping peacefully outside the cabin, opened one golden eye. Seeing them together, the old guardian gave a slow, contented huff before closing his eyes again. His work was finally complete.